Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Masks Off. I'm Kim Gross, and today I have with me guest Melissa Chureau, and we just recently did a workshop together, and we were on another podcast together. So we have been, and I was on Melissa's podcast not long ago. We have just been in this flow of creating beauty in the world and talking about imposterism and perfectionism and the masks and mindfulness. And so that's what we're going to bring to you today. But first, I'll start with the quote as I normally do. And it's one I refer to often in my life, which is that pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. Like, so simple, but so hard to follow at times, and we could talk about that in a few minutes. But first, welcome, Melissa. So happy you are here with me.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. I've forgotten that was the quote, and I'll introduce myself in a second, but I've forgotten that was the quote that I gave you, and it is a quote that I live by. But I just got choked up when you said it again, because it's like kind of where I'm at in the moment. So more on that later. So,
Yes.
um, to introduce myself a little bit, and I love that we've been able to collaborate in so many ways of recently. And we were on the Candid, what is it? The Candid Shop podcast talking about imposterism, and then we recently did a workshop with fellow podcaster from the New World Normal on her series. She does a workshop. Debbie does a workshop, and we also talked about perfectionism and imposterism. And yeah, so I love talking about those topics. I also love talking about mindfulness and somatics and breath work. I am somebody who coaches people in those areas. I am certified to teach in those areas. And I am also, during my day job, I'm a practicing attorney. So I definitely know what it's like to have a high pressured job. I'm also a mom and a wife, and trying to balance all of that. I'm also a daughter and a sister. I am neurodivergent, which just means my particular variety is that I have ADHD. And I'm also in recovery. I have been in recovery from alcoholism for 23 years and continuously, and very grateful for that. So, bringing a lot here. I'm an open book. And my biggest thing is I'm here to help. So, if anyone listens to this podcast and you find something that I say is helpful and you want to talk about it, please reach out.
Mm. I love that. I love that there's so many layers. You're so multifaceted, and we all are, right? But I love that you just called that all out. I mean, you're a lawyer, you're a mom, you're a daughter, you are in recovery. And I actually just today, when I was interviewing another woman on a podcast, just learned what it meant, neurodivergent. I had no idea before. And I just called myself out and said, I've heard this term being used frequently. Can you explain to me what that means? So I do. And now when you say that, I understand. So, and what I really am hoping we can dive into, and I think you're going to be the perfect person to have this conversation with, because, I feel like I've been wondering about this, right? I've been wondering how do people, all right, let me first pause by saying, okay, I have been a stay-at-home mom for my son's 23. So since he was born, 23 years. And I honestly am grateful, and I'm calling this out. Okay. I'm calling this out. I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to stay home and raise my kids, and that my husband was able to provide in a way that I was able to have the resources and the time to do the inner work.
Mm.
Okay, so I've been on this journey for 25 years of recovery and healing and getting to the place where I'm at. Recently, I've been having conversation with a friend and saying, how the fuck do working people do this? Like, honestly, how, like, it takes so much time. Like, my healing and my recovery feels like a freaking full-time job at times.
Yeah.
So how, and I want to be so sensitive when I'm out there preaching, do your work, do your work. And yes, it is important to do your work. And so from your experience, you are a lawyer by day, and you are teaching mindfulness, and you are a mom, and you are neurodivergent, you are in recovery, you are doing all of these things. And so I want to ask, is it possible to be doing all those things and heal and recover, and how do you balance it all?
Yeah, ain't that the like $1 million question?
I mean, we're being real now. We're like being real as real gets, because maybe it's not. Maybe it's like, you know what? Maybe in this lifetime,
Yeah.
I don't know. For some people, they don't have the resources or the time or energy to do the work. That might just be a reality. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I can say, and interesting that your son is 23 years old and I'm 23 years sober. So right when I was getting sober, you were having your son.
Yeah.
And it's really in some ways not dissimilar, right? It's this whole new life. And so 23 years ago, I was a law student and in the throes of crazy alcoholism. I mean, just I was a binge drinker on the weekends and tried to keep my shit together during the week. And things were unraveling really rapidly. And I had been sober before. And so I kind of had that idea of what that looked like. But I really thought, well, I'm smart enough. I can figure this out. I can probably drink and like also, it was probably because I had ADHD by that time. I, realize that ADHD didn't just leave when you outgrew your childhood, that it remained with you. Because that used to be the common thinking was that people outgrew
Yeah.
ADD. It's not true. It's just we learn a lot of coping mechanisms, right?
Mm.
As with anything else. So anyway, I thought I could kind of like, I'd sort of talked myself into being able to do all the things, drink normally, have this normal life, and not tell anyone that I had ADHD or any problems whatsoever. It was all the masks that you talk about. I had all of them all over the place.
Mm.
And I mean, I'm not even sure I knew who I was. And so when things started to unravel and I started to be like, I really honestly felt like I was going crazy at one point. I felt like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde,
Mm.
which in 12-step program, like that's right there in the literature about like if this is how you feel. And I remember going and talking to this psychologist up at the undergraduate campus at the law school that I went to and kind of telling her that. And I remember she sort of looked at me a little bit puzzled, like, oh, do you mean you actually feel like two people? And I was like, no, I don't have multiple personalities, but this is how I feel. I just don't like, I'm two people. And so I knew where to go. And so I very reluctantly went to a 12-step meeting. And I mean, the story is I sat outside that meeting for a good half an hour and like walked to the meeting place and then walked back to my car and back and forth until thankfully somebody who was sitting on the steps was like noticed
Mm.
and welcomed me over. I think that person was an angel. I don't remember ever seeing them again, but I don't think I would have gone and I don't know what would have happened. But my point in telling you all of this is that I had to keep things really simple. So 23 years ago, all I could manage to do was to recover from alcohol addiction. That is it. That is all I had the space for. I didn't have space to eat better. I didn't have space to like meditate yet. I didn't have space to do jack.
Mm.
I had I was still in law school and somehow kept that together. Not very well. I mean, I did fine in law school, surprisingly. But I mean, it was not pretty. And so, I lacked the balance, and I'm not sure I would even recommend it. If anyone is, looking at a mental health disorder or, a substance use disorder, first things first, people, just do that. Like, that's it, you know? To me, that had to be my whole world, other than just getting through, the daily life of going to school. Um, and then, yeah, I mean, as time, as recovery, as I went through the 12 steps and did the work, I had been a meditator before that. So I did have that practice
Yep.
going already. It works a lot better when you're not drunk, in case anyone needs to know.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh, that's too funny.
as does praying. Praying while drunk doesn't really work. I hope you can see why. Um, and so, I learned, in those early days to come back to those practices that I had before, the mindfulness practice. And it really was, I mean, I don't know that it was so much balance, but my ass was fucking falling off. And I had
Mm,
to do it to survive. If I wanted to live, this is what I had to do. So, pain is a really good motivator.
yeah,
And while my life was a little bit crazy, this pain kept me motivated to keep coming back to 12 step, to keep coming back to my mindfulness practice, um, because it was where I found solace. It was where I found, that groundedness, that centeredness, and where I started to learn who the hell I was, because I really didn't know. I mean, like, it's still in some ways a mystery how I ended up in law school, other than I was terrified to take the test that I thought you had to take to go to graduate school, because I didn't think I knew anything.
mm,
And so I took the skills test, which is the LSAT, to get into law school. And I thought Law and Order looked really cool. Other than that, like, and justice was really important to me. And now I've done some subsequent work, and it really makes a lot of sense why I wanted a profession that was very much about rule following and structure, because I had none growing up and I had
mm,
none as a young adult. And so I was inviting all of this, but I didn't know that then, right? So it was a mystery at the time. So yeah, I think it's time and adding on the work slowly. So it wasn't like, oh, I got sober and then I was also practicing mindfulness and I was also doing breath work and I was also a mom and I was also this and I was also that. Like, no, it's like these slow growth of layers that sometimes get peeled back a little bit again. And then they, maybe a few steps forward and then a couple back and a few steps forward and a couple back.
mm.
And, your ultimate question is, and I know I answered way more than you were probably looking for, but like, now how am I able to balance it all? The God's honest truth, Kim, I don't know that I do.
Mm,
I mean, I do my best. And a lot of time, there was this story. So my husband is French, and my daughter is also French and American. But we had, when she was a young kid, I'm going to butcher it because my French accent isn't good, but there was this book called La Famille Petit Plat, which translates into the family of little plates. And it
mm,
was this story about these people who owned a restaurant, and they were always like juggling the plates and running around and doing all of that. And that's what comes to mind. Sometimes that's what it feels like. Sometimes days are amazing.
yeah,
Some days I wake up, every day I wake up and I meditate, and I pray. So that is part of my daily practice, no matter what.
yeah,
That has never left me. Um, and then, whether or not I know to do extra work, to dive in, to remember to be mindful the rest of the day,
yeah.
all that other stuff, that's up in the air. Most of the times, yes. But then there are days like today,
Mm,
perfect day for a podcast. because, despite, and that's the thing, maybe that's the message, is like sometimes days just happen.
Yeah.
And so you could be perfectly prepared in terms of you have a kick-ass mindfulness practice, a great breath work practice, a great, grounding, centering practice. You have all those things and you've done all the things. You've been of service to somebody else. You've done all those things and things will still, life gets fucking lifey sometimes.
That's the
And
boom
work
piece.
gets worky.
Yeah.
So, and better to show up with that, with all those things in place
Mm.
than without them. And so while it isn't always perfect and it doesn't always feel right, and I definitely make mistakes and misstep, I have those practices. I have the community. I have all of that there for me. Because the biggest problem is when life gets lifey and work gets worky, I'll forget and I'll think I'm all by myself,
Mm.
that it's all up to me. And there's a lot to that based
Yeah.
on childhood experiences and other things. But that is the biggest illusion that I will succumb to if I'm not careful.
Yep.
That for me is where the work is to, and if I can remember in those moments to invite, and we talked about this the other day in our workshop together, a compassion practice. And we can talk about that later, but it's so important for me. And that compassion practice will often help me remember I'm not alone.
Yeah.
I don't have to do all this lifey stuff by myself. I don't have to balance it all by myself. I don't have to do all of the work by myself.
Yeah.
I have the universe. I have a support group. I have other people. I mean, the one thing that's been amazing about the pandemic is meeting people like you and other people who I
Mm.
think will be lifelong friends and supports that I would have
Yep.
never met. And so being able to remember that I'm not in this game alone is
Is
hugely important.
yes. So I think what I want to like underline here and highlight is that um because we started out the podcast by saying that pain is inevitable and suffering is optional. And you just mentioned life is going to be lifey, work is going to be like worky. Life is going to be what it is. And so whether or not you are someone who is working full time, or you're like me, where you've been a stay-at-home mom, I think I want to underscore, or I want to own and claim that I believe that it is still important on whatever level that means for an individual to do the inner healing and to do the work. Like you went through recovery, you've done your path, I've done my path. Because here's the thing, one way or another, we're going down this path of living life. Do we want to show up fully and in our wholeness? Again, I go back to that deathbed quote all the time, or that deathbed example of when you're on your deathbed. Do you want to look back and reflect back on your life and regret because you didn't show up fully, or you didn't have meaningful connections with others because you weren't being your whole self? You were hiding, you were protecting, you were holding back, and you were allowing, like, I understand that survival comes first and foremost. So I understand that you may have to have your day job, whether it is to, and I don't know your situation, but whether it's to support your daughter being able to go to college, or if it's to contribute to the household,
Mhm.
for, having dinner on the table and having a roof over your head. Like, I don't want to take away any of that for anyone who's listening and saying, but I can't afford to not have a job. So I'm sensitive to that. And it's an and, right? Not an either or, it's an and I think you're a living, walking example of you're not being a lawyer 24/7. You have other moments in your day. And even wow. And then you can, if you in a moment would share with us today what happened in terms of your mindfulness group that you taught, that even throughout your day while you're at your job, you can find moments of just pausing and coming back to yourself and coming back to presence. You can use weeknights, weekends to learn more about yourself, to become more aware of your patterns, to become more aware of your limiting beliefs, your inner dialogue, all that is holding you back
Yeah.
from living this one life fully, fully as you are meant to be, your true freaking authentic self, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I think, gosh, that's so important. Thank you for that. For many years, and what we haven't talked about is, I was sober and in recovery and doing all this work, but I definitely didn't share it with anyone who wasn't in 12 step or my, immediate family or circle of friends. And that's fine. And some people, I'm not saying that you should or shouldn't do it. It's an individual decision. But for me, I didn't do it, and it felt like a wrong decision. It always felt like I was hiding part of myself. And I
Yep.
definitely didn't tell anyone I had ADD because really terrified, especially in the field of law, that this would be seen as some sort of weakness or inability to perform or what have you. And so I hid that, and it was very painful. It was very painful to walk around. And so I talked about how I used to feel like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in a way that didn't leave me. Not that I was like, doing bad things, but I felt in many ways unintegrated. And so, about 10 years ago or so, I started to do the work to do the integration piece.
Mm.
And because again, it came to, I mean, in a different way than when I got sober, but in a way, it was like it was too painful not to be who I am completely
Yeah.
for me. And again, I'm not suggesting that this is the only way to do it, or this is the only way you're going to find peace. But for me, it was really crucial to integrate and start being who I am for real at work, talking about, my ADHD where appropriate, talking about my recovery where that might be helpful. And every day when I wake up in the morning and I do my prayer and meditation, I ask the universe. I have no idea who God is or what God is, and I don't pretend to know. But for me, I set an intention by asking the universe to help show me how to be my full and authentic self, how to be useful to other people, and like that's my main mission, right? That is where I find my purpose is, and get out of myself. And not that I have to get out of myself, but to be more myself, I guess, is a better way to put
Yeah,
it.
it's to be yourself. It's to remove the masks that are hiding your true
Yeah.
self, to
Yeah.
not be afraid, to be uninhibited.
Yeah. And so I look for those ways. So what happened today, for instance, and I set things up. And so, by practicing mindfulness for years, I can definitely, not always, but usually be much more aware of my thoughts, my emotions, my bodily sensations, because we had a lot of wisdom from our bodies, and I can be a lot more integrated. So today something happened at work that was just enormously stressful, and that will happen, right? It was something that I had to do that was very important that I couldn't say no to without, significant consequences,
Yeah.
that I wasn't willing to take. And so but I noticed how I was feeling. And instead of being reactive, it might have been a little bit reactive, but mostly I was able to calm down and kind of go, well, I'm just going to do the best that I can do with what I have and the time that I have.
Mm.
And I didn't cancel. I lead a once a month mindfulness practice at my organization, and I didn't cancel that. I decided to lead it, and what I was saying earlier is the irony was that the mindfulness practice that I was guiding people through was how not to give in to both those internal and external pressures to do, that we have value just in being.
Mm.
And so it's fascinating to me, but almost every time, I think every time I've written a mindfulness practice for this group or for others, it's the one that I need in the moment and don't even necessarily know it. And so I led this practice, and I get into, to me, a meditative state like no other when I'm leading a practice. And at the end, it was like I promised everybody who was in the practice, along with myself, that I was going to take a moment every hour to just be, to
Mm.
remember to just be. And that's where, I've landed today, is like, despite all the craziness, Jack Kornfield from Spirit Rock Meditation Center, who's written a million books on mindfulness, he talks about being in the one seat, being in the center, and this tornado of thought and emotion and circumstances are going around us, but we're in the center, we're in the eye of the storm. We can choose to reach out and, get hooked and fall right into that. It's really easy. Or we can sit there and be. And it doesn't mean that we're not doing anything. We're just in a better position to notice and to see and to be aware. And then hopefully also be, compassionate with ourselves. And that's what I was able to do today, because I have this regular practice, this regular muscle of showing up no matter what, suiting up and showing up, being myself, being willing to take off those masks, call out to people who are safe for me to call that out to, my community, and say, like, yikes, I'm kind of struggling with this right now. And so here's what I'm going to intend to do. And I'm doing it.
Mm.
So,
That's
yeah.
beautiful. I'm always referring to, we have to be more human beings than human doings, or at least, having a balance. And what I also love about you sharing what you shared is that you're showing like real example of how to integrate this. Like, it's not like you and I are sitting here and talking about some kumbaya shit, you know what I mean, that you just do on a mountaintop. This is a way to take the teachings, to take the practices and the work, and to actually implement it and bring it into your life that is busy, that does have a lot going on. There is stress, and it's not about being perfect. As you mentioned, we're not trying to be perfect at it, but just incorporating it in so that we have tools, that we have a practice that we can fall back on.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it does come down to that quote of, pain is inevitable and suffering is optional, because pain will happen, life will happen, things will happen. And that's whether or not you're a stay-at-home parent or somebody who works outside of the home, or, whatever your circumstances may be, pain is inevitable. That is life. How we choose to be with that is optional. And I think that's so important. And by the way, I want to call out that you asked me, like, is it possible to do all these things? It's the same question for you. I would just turn it around, like, how are you able to stay at home and be there for your kids and do all of the things for your kids and also do all of this work? It's the same question.
Yeah, it is true. Well, thank you for calling that out, because you're right. It is, I could very easily have gotten lost in just mothering, being a mom, and not taking the time to do my own work and reparent myself. And I still chose to do both, more, not so much
And
in
I
the
mean,
beginning,
it's
but
really hard
yeah.
because being a parent is very time and energy consuming, and we can get lost in it regardless of, we're doing that full time, or we get a, I mean, I like to call it, I get a little bit of a break by going to work.
Mm, yeah.
So and I know not everyone might view it that way, but that was part of my experience, as painful as it was to be away from my child, especially
Yeah.
when she was younger. I mean, the point is that we can all get lost in whatever story we
Yep.
have going on in our lives. And so it's like, what are we deciding to do to take care of ourselves? Because to do the work to take care of ourselves is ultimately an act of community, right? Because we take care of ourselves and then we can be present, non reactive or less reactive, and we can actually contribute, to our relationships, to our communities, and to the things that are important to us. If we don't, we're not really there. Like you've said before, we're wearing a mask, and our real selves, aren't really there. And I mean, I love that you bring that idea of like, let's think about, and the Buddhists do this too, like we contemplate death. And I remember my daughter, being in the car with some other kids, and I can't remember what they were talking about. And they were talking about like, oh my gosh, what if this happened and, that person died? And I was like, well, everybody dies. And my daughter, who was, I think, a preteen at the time, was like, Mom,
Bring it
don't be
down.
so morbid. But
Yeah.
it's a really beautiful exercise to remember that this is the shared, we share a life, and we share the fact of death. And it can keep us maybe a little bit more, quote unquote, honest with who and why we're here, who we are and why we're here.
Well, it totally does for me when I think about that, being on my deathbed, like I want to be able to reflect back and know that I showed up as fully as I could. Now, that doesn't mean perfect, right? That doesn't mean
Right.
that from today forward, I'm never going to put on a mask. So I want that to be highlighted and underscored, that this isn't about perfection and reaching some pinnacle. It's about a work in progress. And where I am today, so one of the slogans from the rooms is progress, not perfection.
Mhm.
One of the, if I compare where I am today and I look at the yardstick behind me, I have come a long, long way in terms of taking off my masks and showing up more authentically. Does that mean that every single day, 24/7, that I'm in that place? No. And are there still, there's definitely, my perfection mask shows up when I'm on social media. My perfection mask shows up when I go to create something for my business. If I get inspired, right?
Yeah.
This has been coming up for me just in the last few days. I get inspired with an idea to create a workshop or to create this or that. Immediately right after, the little inner dialogue or the gremlins come up with a million reasons and excuses why not to do it. Well, maybe I should just wait till the fall, or I don't really know how to, make good graphics with Canva. So, I'm not really that good, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm only aware of it because I've been so hyper focused on my patterns, and I teach it all the time. So I'm aware that that's what's at play. But to many people, they might not even realize, or me 10 years ago wouldn't have even realized that that's what I was doing, that I'm holding myself back from
Yeah.
shining in the world, from being my big and authentic self, sharing my zone of genius with the world, which is what my true self is coming forth to do in terms of doing the podcast or doing social media posts or doing these workshops. But the scared part of me, the mask part that I want to protect, saying, no, 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 Kim, do not put yourself out there. That's very dangerous, because if you put yourself out there, A, you might fail. B, people might attack you. They might criticize you, or you might be embarrassed, or whatever the case is. And so therefore, subconsciously and very subtly, I can pull myself back and be very small and
Yeah.
stay in my small world. I don't even know how I got onto that, but what do you think about
No,
that?
I mean, I totally can do that. And I was noticing today, just to call it out there. So I just finished breathwork training that I loved, and it was very immersive, and just loved it. And then, but I'm not quote unquote doing anything this week to better myself, right? And I was feeling, and I realized I was like yesterday and today I was kind of feeling shitty, and I was like, oh, that's what that is.
Mm,
I have a minor, maybe major addiction to self-improvement. It's a good one to have, comparatively speaking,
yeah.
but I can't get all of my value from just saying what I'm doing or learning, right? And it's like, oh, okay, that's what's going on. And again, having some compassion for myself, like, yeah, I get like that's what's going on. And, that there's a part of me that thinks I have to always be like improving, which actually is, corroborating this inaccurate story that I'm not enough as is.
Yes. Yes. Oh my God. See how subtle and what a trickster the ego can be in that
Yes.
way. I
Yeah.
will tell you that just since Saturday, so for the last few days, I haven't been feeling well at all. And I don't know if it's a flare up with the autoimmune disease that I have, or if it's just some kind of bug. But I had like in the last 4 days, the only thing I have done are these podcasts. And do you know that inner dialogue, that inner critic has been like running on volume 8? Not like if we were 0 to 10, 10 being the highest volume there could be, it was probably like 8, or like, Kim, really? You're just going to be on the couch? Like, really? You're just going to rest and take care of yourself? Kim, come on, you need to do more. Like this is not productive enough. Now, fortunately, again, because I'm so aware and used to it, I can hear that inner dialogue, and then I can counter that inner dialogue with self-compassion that we talk about, the grace,
Yeah.
giving myself permission. Easy does it. It's okay. I'm still enough if I just sit and rest on the couch. I haven't felt this sick in a very long time. It is okay. My body needs to heal. I had to go through all of that litany of antidotes and affirmations over and over. Melissa, I'm not kidding you. I had to like keep on telling myself it was okay
Yeah.
to be sick.
Isn't that crazy? I remember last September I had COVID, and I had it really, it was not a mild case. And I was freaking out about not being able to work and like do things, and you know and had the same thing, like, why, like, I got to show up, I got to do these things. And underlying that was that story of like, I'm not enough unless I'm doing all these things, being a quote unquote productive member of society. And I just want to call that out. Like, it's okay to rest. Not only is it okay, like, we must rest. And that resting is doing, it's doing for ourselves and for others. And God, it's so hard to remember sometimes, and
It
I
is.
don't know, like, I was thinking about The Simpsons, maybe because I live in the Pacific Northwest where it was born. But at the beginning of like most of the shows, like Bart Simpson is like writing something on the chalkboard about like how he's never gonna do something again. And I'm like, oh, I need to write that out. Like, I am enough, I am enough, I am enough, like over and over and over again. And
Yes.
it's not to ignore these feelings and experiences, because I don't think that's what either of us are saying.
Mm.
We are paying attention to them, giving voice to them, acknowledging them, giving compassion to those voices, and then also recognizing that we are enough.
It's so beautiful. And what I'm thinking is that bringing it full circle to what we were talking about in the beginning about not going it alone, right?
Mm.
And we don't have to do this alone. And I think it's just so important to listen to podcasts like this, or to, whether you work with a coach or a therapist or have a friend, like just sharing, like, is it helpful to you that you heard me say that about being sick? I know when you said it about how it helped me, like,
Yes.
we're not alone in experiencing and living with this level of perfectionism. Like you, oh, Melissa feels that way too. Oh my God, that feels so good on the inside for me to know that she's experiencing that as well, or has experienced that.
Yeah, I mean, in 12 step, they talk about identification being so important, right? And I think the reason is like Kristen Neff, self-compassion researcher, practitioner, teacher, author, talks about is that shared humanity,
Mm,
that identification with another, and like, oh, that's what that is, and I'm not alone. That's the piece. And I'm not alone. And I'm with someone else on this path. So
absolutely.
important.
It's so important and so beautiful. So we have talked about so many different helpful tips and tools, but if you were to say, if you were to have one tip or tool as a parting gift for the listeners, what would you offer?
Hmm. I mean, my favorite right now today is self compassion, and probably because it's one I struggle with,
Mm,
because of my perfectionism and this, you know, belief that I come back to from time to time because it's well worn in my neural pathways that I have to do it alone. And so, a simple self compassion practice that Kristen Neff teaches is this like self compassion break where we notice whatever story we're telling ourselves. Oh, I suck, or, I'm not worth it. What's my problem? I've got to like do this thing in order to like have value in this world or whatever. I will notice that thought. I will also notice where I feel it in my body because our bodies are really wise. And often it's in my heart area, so I'll put my hand on my heart, but it might be on my belly, it might be on my legs, or it might be me holding my other hand. It's really fascinating when we hold our hands really tightly together. It sometimes feels like somebody else is holding our hand, which is
mm,
a really interesting and lovely feeling.
mm,
Some people do this, and I haven't done this a whole lot, but holding like ourselves in a hug. But usually I'll put one or both hands over my heart and I will say, this is really hard.
mm.
What you're experiencing is really hard. And I know there are other people out there, that's the shared humanity piece, feeling exactly what I'm feeling right now. And I know that this thought is doing its best to protect me from pain and sadness and anger and all of those things. So thank you. Thank you. And it's going to be okay. And
Mm.
so that self compassion break of recognizing, whatever thought or feeling it is, feeling it, um, recognizing the shared humanity in it, maybe offering it some compassion by recognizing it's trying to be helpful,
Yeah.
then reassuring myself it's going to be okay, um, is really helpful.
Mm.
Yeah, it's one
Awesome.
of my favorite practices that I know you teach too.
Yes. Yes. I love it. So where can listeners find you?
Yeah, I can be found at thefullymindful.com. I also have a podcast by the name The Fully Mindful. And every other week, I offer up a free mindfulness meditation practice, usually on some sort of theme. And then the other weeks, I interview really interesting people who are finding or have found their purposes in life. I have really great people that I bring on the show, like Kim,
Yeah.
and authors, social disruptors, people just doing their thing, being human and being extraordinary. Um, and I'm also on TikTok and Instagram, and I think you're going to put those in the show notes.
I,
So I won't mention those. But if anyone's listening and you don't feel like writing anything down, thefullymindful.com is where you can find me.
awesome. And I will have all that information in the show notes. So thank you so much for being here,
Thank
Melissa. It was
you.
great. We went in so many directions, but I felt like it was just flowing and it was organic, and what came up and
Yeah.
had to just be expressed. So I love that. Thank you so much for being a guest on today.
Thank you. And thank you for all the work that you're doing with helping people get their masks off and be their and live their true and authentic selves.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening to another episode of Masks Off. I'm Kim Gross, and I will see you next time on Masks Off.